My son slid the papers across the table and said, "Just medical forms, Dad." I almost signed them. My name is Frank Delaney. I was 71 years old then, a retired Army sergeant, widower, and the kind of man who still believed family didn't lie to your face. It was a quiet weekday afternoon in my living room, sunlight cutting through the blinds, dust floating in the air like it had nowhere better to be. Elliot sat across from me, calm, confident, too calm. He tapped the stack of papers with one finger like he'd done this before. "It's just routine hospital stuff," he said, "in case of emergencies." His wife, Marissa, stood by the window. She smiled, but she didn't look at me, not once. Something in my gut tightened, not fear, instinct. The same one that used to wake me up in foreign deserts when everything looked quiet. I reached for the pen anyway. That's when the door opened. Walter Red Callahan, my old Army buddy, stepped inside unannounced, carrying a six-pack like he always did. He glanced at the table, then at the papers. "What's a signet?" he asked. I handed them to him. But before I tell you how I uncovered what those papers were really meant to do, take a moment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because what comes next is exactly why that support matters. He scanned the first page. Then the second, the color drained from his face. He looked at me, eyes wide, voice barely steady. "Frank," he said, "do not sign a single word of this." And in that moment I knew my life was about to change. Elliot didn't sit down. That should have been the first sign. He stood at the edge of my kitchen table, papers already stacked and squared like he'd practiced the motion before walking in. Marissa hovered near the counter, pretending to straighten a mug that didn't need it. "Dad, we just need this signed today," Elliot said. "The hospital's been cracking down on compliance stuff. Total nonsense, but you know how it is." I didn't actually. In the Army, paperwork had always come with explanations or consequences spelled out real clear. But I nodded anyway. I trusted my son, or maybe I trusted the idea of him. He slid the papers toward me, tapping the bottom corner with his finger. "Just a formality. You don't even need to read the whole thing." That made my stomach tighten. I picked up the packet. It was thicker than I expected, fine print, dense paragraphs. Words like authorization and consent showed up more than once, but nowhere did I see a clear heading that said medical. "How come the doctor didn't mention this?" I asked. Elliot exhaled like I just asked something inconvenient. "Dad, they never do. This is admin stuff. Look, we're already late getting this in." Marissa smiled then, tight, polite, careful. The kind of smile people use when they don't want to be questioned. "It's just to make things easier for you," she said, "so we can help if anything comes up." Help. I'd carried a rifle through 2 tours and buried friends who never made it home. I wasn't afraid of hospitals, but I didn't like being rushed in my own kitchen. I reached for my reading glasses. Elliot's hand came down flat on the table, not aggressive, just firm enough to be noticed. "Dad, seriously, there's nothing in there that matters." "It's standard." That's when the door creaked open behind us. "Afternoon, Frankie." Walter Red Collins stepped in like he owned the place, same way he always had. 72 years old, still built like the Army never let go of him. He held up a paper bag, brought sandwiches you forget to eat when you're stressed. Elliot stiffened. Marissa's smile vanished completely. Red's eyes went straight to the documents in my hands. "What's that?" he asked. "Hospital paperwork," Elliot said quickly, too quickly. "Dad's signing so we can get things moving." Red didn't answer him. He looked at me. "You read it?" "Not yet," I said. "Mind if I take a look first?" Red asked, already reaching for his glasses. Elliot laughed. "Come on, man, it's nothing. You don't need to." Red took the papers anyway. The kitchen went quiet. No one moved. Red stood there reading, his eyes moving slower with every page, his jaw tight. The color drained from his face in a way I'd only seen once before, back in '91 when orders came down that didn't add up. He looked up at me, then at Elliot, then back at me again. "Frank," he said quietly, voice suddenly sharp as wire, "you do not sign a single word of this." Elliot snapped, "You don't know what you're talking about." Red folded the papers once, careful, deliberate. "Oh, I know exactly what this is," he said. And in that moment I realized the urgency wasn't for the hospital. It was for me. Red didn't raise his voice when he started explaining. That scared me more than if he had. He pulled his chair closer to the table, adjusted his reading glasses, and tapped the paper with one thick finger. The same finger that used to trace maps in desert sand when we were 20 years younger. "This line right here," he said quietly. "This isn't medical." Elliot sighed like a teenager dealing with an overbearing parent. "It's standard language. Hospitals use it all the time." Red didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the page, focused, sharp, the way they used to be when something was off on patrol. "It says medical power of attorney," Red continued. "But keep reading." I leaned forward, my stomach tightened. "This grants decision-making authority," Red said, "not just for treatment but for finances tied to treatment." Marissa shifted in her seat. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's just in case something happens," she said softly. "It's protection." "Protection for who?" Red asked. Silence. Red slid the paper toward me. Frank, if you sign this, Elliot becomes the sole decision-maker if you're declared temporarily incapacitated. That's normal, Elliot snapped. He's my father. Red finally looked up, his eyes locked onto Elliot S. And who decides what temporarily incapacitated means? No one answered. Red flipped to the next page. Right here, a physician selected by the hospital, or he tapped again by the agent. Agent, that word hit me hard. You're saying, I started. I'm saying, Red interrupted gently, that if you sign this and get admitted, Elliot could control medical decisions and any assets connected to your care. Accounts, property, transfers. My ears rang. That's ridiculous, Elliot said quickly. Dad, this is just paranoia. Red's been suspicious since Vietnam. Iraq, Red corrected flatly, and suspicion kept me alive. Marissa crossed her arms. Why would we do something like that? Red leaned back. That's not my question. Question is why it's written this way. I stared at the papers. Suddenly every word looked heavier, sharper. I thought this was about doctors, I said. It is, Red replied. Doctors who can declare you unfit, even briefly. Elliot laughed, but it came out wrong. You're acting like this is a hostile takeover. Red met my eyes again. Frank, this document doesn't wait for an emergency. My heart skipped. What do you mean? Red pointed to a clause near the bottom. Activation upon signature. Room felt smaller. You don't need to be sick, he said. You don't need to be unconscious the moment you sign authority transfers. Marissa's smile vanished. Elliot stood up fast. That's not how it works. Red stood too, slowly, steady. That's exactly how it works. I looked at my son, really looked at him, his jaw tight, his hands clenched, not worried, defensive. Red folded the papers and slid them back toward Elliot. You rushed him for a reason, he said, and it wasn't medical. My mouth felt dry. Red placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and familiar. Frank, he said quietly, this isn't something that could hurt you later. He paused. This is something that takes effect the second you sign. And in that moment I realized the real danger wasn't what might happen to me in a hospital. It was what my own son was trying to take while I was still standing. Janice tried to warn me. That was the thought that kept circling my head after Red left, after Elliot stormed out muttering about overreaction and old men seeing ghosts. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the papers still spread out in front of me like a crime scene I'd barely escaped. Janice had been gone 6 years by then. Cancer. Fast and unfair. But her voice came back to me clear as day, sharper than the silence in that room. Frank, she'd said once, sitting on the edge of our bed, folding laundry with that tight look she got when something bothered her. Our son is ambitious, that's not bad, but ambition without patience turns dangerous. I'd brushed it off. Elliot was driven, smart, always planning ahead. I was proud of that. I told her she worried too much. She shook her head. You see a son, I see patterns. That conversation came back now, heavier than it ever had before. Years earlier, when we were updating our wills, Janice insisted on meeting a lawyer alone first. I remember feeling annoyed about it. We de-shared everything for 43 years. What was there to separate now? I just want to understand the options, she said calmly, in case something happens to one of us before the other. I didn't argue, I trusted her. Afterward, she told me she wanted certain things kept separate, not hidden, just protected, accounts in different structures. Clear boundaries, safeguards, for what? I asked. For pressure, she said. Families apply it without meaning to, sometimes with meaning. I laughed then, told her this wasn't the army, no one was trying to flank us. She didn't laugh back. Promise me something, she said. If anyone ever rushes you, anyone, stop and read twice, especially if they say it's just paperwork. I promised, and like so many promises made in comfort, I forgot. After she died, Elliot handled most of the arrangements. He was efficient, organized. I was grateful. Grief makes you hand over responsibilities you don't want to carry. That was my mistake. I trusted momentum. Sitting there now, I realized something that made my stomach tight. Janice hadn't just been cautious. She'd been preparing, not against strangers, against familiarity. I pulled open the old filing cabinet in the hallway, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. Dust clung to the handles. Inside were folders labeled in her neat handwriting. Insurance, property, legal. Then one marked simply, Frank, read if pressured. My hands slowed. Inside was a thin packet, copies of documents, notes in the margins, names circled, dates underlined, and a handwritten note taped to the front. If you're reading this, it means someone you love is asking for more than they should. Chest tightened. Janice hadn't forgot. She'd prepared safeguards, and I had been living right past them. Trust doesn't break all at once. It stretches first, quietly, like metal under too much weight. Sitting there with those papers still on the table, Red's warning echoing in my ears, memories started lining up in my head, moments I'd brushed off for years because they felt small on their own. Elliot had always been good at phrasing things like suggestions. You don't really need to drive anymore, Dad. I'll handle the bank stuff, it's easier. Let me talk to the contractor, you shouldn't stress yourself. At first it felt like care, thoughtfulness, a son stepping up but care asks, control decides. I remembered the time he sold my old pickup without telling me, said it was unsafe. I found out when I walked outside and saw an empty driveway. He'd already transferred the title to save time. Family dinner a year later, someone asked me about my finances. Before I could answer, Elliot laughed and said, Dad doesn't really keep track of that stuff anymore, I've got it handled. People chuckled politely. I smiled, stayed quiet. That smile cost me more than I realized. There were other moments too, subtle ones. Elliot answering questions directed at me, Marissa stepping in to clarify my preferences. Decisions made inside conversations I wasn't invited into. I told myself it was nothing. That aging meant accepting help. That pride had to make room for practicality. What I didn't see was how often help arrived uninvited. Red shifted in his chair and looked at Elliot. This isn't new, is it? Elliot scoffed. You're reading way too much into this. But his voice was tight. I thought about Janice again, about how she used to watch people more than she listened to them. She'd say, listen to what they rush you through, Frank, that's where the truth hides. Elliot had been rushing me for years, not loudly, efficiently. Every time I hesitated, he framed it as concern. Every time I asked a question, he answered just enough to move past it. He never argued, he redirected, and I let him, because silence felt easier than confrontation, because I didn't want to believe my own son would treat me like a problem to manage, but sitting there now I saw it clearly. This paperwork wasn't about hospitals, it was about momentum, about turning my trust into leverage. Marissa finally spoke, her voice smooth. Frank, you're overthinking this, we're just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From my own decisions, from my independence. Red leaned back, eyes still on the document. Funny thing about protection, he said quietly, it always seems to come with strings when the wrong people offer it. The room felt smaller, Elliot's jaw tightened. You don't know our family. Red met his gaze without blinking. I know tactics. I looked at the signature line again, how close I'd come to signing. How natural it had felt to comply. That's when the last piece clicked into place. This wasn't the first attempt, it was just the cleanest one. And if Red hadn't walked through that door when he did, I would have handed over my life with a pen stroke, thinking I was being responsible. I pushed the papers away slowly. Trust hadn't failed me. I'd handed it to someone who learned how to use it as a weapon. And now that I could see it, I knew one thing for certain, they wouldn't stop here. Red didn't say much while he spread the papers across my dining table. That alone told me this was serious. He adjusted his reading glasses the way he used to adjust his helmet strap back in the day, slow, deliberate, like he was preparing for impact. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching dust in the air. Everything felt suspended, waiting. These aren't the only documents you've got, he said finally. You kept copies from when Janice was sick, didn't you? I nodded and went to the hall closet. Dug through an old lockbox I hadn't opened in years. The metal squeaked like it was annoyed at being disturbed. D.I. laid the stack out in front of him. Red whistled low, thought so. He flipped pages with practiced ease, eyes scanning faster than I could follow. Army eyes, Janice used to call them, the kind that noticed what others missed because missing things got people killed. There, he said, tapping a page with one thick finger. I leaned in. What am I looking at? A safeguard, he replied. One your son clearly didn't expect. He explained it slowly, making sure I understood every word. Years ago, right after Janice insisted on restructuring things, she'd pushed for a counterclause buried deep in the trust documents. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't obvious, but it was airtight. If anyone attempted to assume medical authority while also gaining control over assets, especially under questionable circumstances, the authority automatically reverted to the original holder, me. They tried to grab everything at once, Red said. That's where they screwed up. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that Janice had protected me even after she was gone. Anger that I'd forgotten, or worse, assumed I'd never need it. So they can't, I started. They can try, Red cut in. But legally, you still hold final authority, medical, financial, all of it. My hands trembled slightly as I sat back. Elliot had been so confident, so rushed, like he needed my signature before something else could surface. This clause, I said slowly, it's active. Red nodded, dormant until triggered, and they triggered it the moment they brought those papers into this house. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. They didn't read this, did they? I asked. Red gave a humorless smile. People who think they're entitled don't read warnings, they assume compliance. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere, a lawn mower hummed. Ordinary life continued while my own family had been trying to quietly take control of mine. What do I do now? I asked. Red gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them back toward me. Now you decide whether you want to play defense or go on offense. I thought about Elliot's smile, Marissa's careful silence, the way they'd rushed me like time was their ally. Janice had known better. "So I can stop this," I said. "You can reverse it," Red replied, "but only if you move first. Once they realize this clause exists, they'll pivot, new strategy, new pressure." I nodded slowly. For the first time since those papers hit my table, I didn't feel confused or old or outmatched. I felt steady, because the truth was simple. They thought they were closing a deal. They didn't realize they'd already activated my last line of defense, and if I moved fast enough, I could turn their trap back on them before they even knew it existed. I didn't raise my voice when I asked him. That surprised Elliot more than anything. We were sitting at my kitchen table again, the same one where he'd slid those papers toward me days earlier. This time there was no stack of documents, just coffee cups that had gone cold and a silence thick enough to lean on. "I have one question," I said. Elliot crossed his arms. "If this is about Red," "It's not," I interrupted. My tone stayed level, army calm, the kind that comes when you're already braced. I looked him straight in the eye. "Why do medical forms give you control over my finances?" He blinked once too fast. "That's not what they do," he said. "You're misunderstanding it." "Then explain it," I said, slowly. Marissa shifted in her chair. She didn't look at either of us, just stared at the wall like she was waiting for a fire alarm to end the conversation. Elliot exhaled sharply. "Dad, this is how hospitals work now. Everything's connected. Liability, billing, it's standard." "Standard," I repeated. "Then why didn't you say that?" He leaned back, irritation creeping in. "Because you overthink things, you always have." I nodded. "That true?" He hesitated, just a fraction. Red read the document," I continued. "He said it gives you immediate authority, not later, not if I'm incapacitated, immediately." Elliot's jaw tight. "Red's stuck in the past, he sees enemies everywhere." "He saw something specific," I said. "So I'll ask again, why does a medical form move my assets under your control?" Silence. Not the comfortable kind. Elliot stood up and started pacing. "You're making this into something it's not. You're avoiding the question," I said. He stopped and turned on me, "because the question assumes bad intent. Then correct me." His voice rose, "Because it makes things easier, because someone needs to be able to act if something happens to you." "Something already did happen," I said quietly. "You tried to rush me." Marissa finally spoke. "Frank, no one's trying to hurt you." I looked at her. "Then why didn't you look at me once while those papers were on the table?" She didn't answer. Elliot rubbed his face, frustration leaking through. "You're letting him poison you." "No," I said. "I'm listening." His eyes flashed. "Fine, you want the truth." I nodded once. "The truth is you're 71, he snapped. "Things happen, and when they do, someone has to step in. I'm your son, that's my role." "Stepping in isn't the same as stepping over," I said. His voice hardened. "You're being stubborn." I met his stare. "I'm being careful." That's when his tone changed completely, cold, controlled. "If you don't sign," he said, "this gets complicated. Lawyers get involved, things slow down, you don't want that." There it was, not concern, pressure. "You're threatening me," I said. "I'm warning you," he replied. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff but my back straight. "No," I said, "you're showing me who you are." He clenched his jaw. "If you keep blocking this, I'll have no choice but to protect my interests." I nodded. "Then we're done here." He stared at me, shocked. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, and I just did. As he stormed out, one thought stayed with me, heavy and undeniable. My son hadn't asked for my trust. He'd tried to take it, and now that I'd said no, he was ready to fight. Elliot raised his voice before I ever did. That was the moment I knew something had truly broken. We were standing in my living room, the same room where I taught him how to throw a football, where Janice used to sit on the couch and correct his homework, where he once asked me if I thought he'd be a good man someday. Now his hands were clenched at his sides, jaw tight, voice sharp enough to cut. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "You embarrass me. You let your friend interfere in family business." Walter Red stood near the doorway, silent now, arms crossed. He said his piece earlier. This part was mine. "I asked a question," I said calmly. "You didn't answer it." Marissa stood behind Elliot, close enough to touch him, far enough not to be involved. Her eyes stayed on the floor, not shocked, not confused, avoidant. Elliot took a step closer. "You don't understand how things work anymore, Dad. Hospitals, lawyers, compliance, this is normal." "Then it shouldn't scare you that someone read it carefully," I replied. That's when he snapped. "You're 71 years old," he barked. "You think you can manage everything forever?" The words hung there, ugly and loud. Outside, I noticed a curtain shift across the street. A dog stopped barking mid-noise. Voices carry when people forget how exposed anger makes them. Marissa finally spoke. "Elliot, maybe," he cut her off with a raised hand. "No, he needs to hear this." I stayed seated. That seemed to anger him more than anything. "You're being stubborn," he said. "You're risking your care, your safety." "No," I said quietly. "I'm protecting it." His laugh was sharp and humorless. "From me?" "Yes." Silence. I thought about the army, about briefings where calm mattered more than rank. about how shouting usually meant someone was losing control of the situation. "You think I'm trying to steal from you," Elliot said. "That's insulting." I looked at him then, really looked. "I think you're in a hurry," I said, "and I think you don't like obstacles." He shook his head. "You don't trust me." "I trusted you," I said. "That's why this hurts." His face reddened. "You're listening to outsiders instead of your own son." "Walter isn't an outsider," I replied. "He's someone who knows how documents are used when people stop asking questions." Elliot turned away, pacing now. "This is ridiculous. You're making this bigger than it is." I stood then, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to remind him I wasn't fragile. "No," I said, "I'm finally making it visible." He stopped pacing. "So what now?" I folded my hands the way Janice used to when she wanted a conversation to slow down. "Now we do this the right way." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means lawyers," I said. "It means everything on the table, no surprises, no urgency." Marissa's head lifted sharply. "You don't need to do that," Elliot said quickly. "We can handle this privately." "That ship sailed when you told me to sign something without explaining it," I replied. Outside, someone cleared their throat. I didn't look. Elliot stared at me, breathing hard. Then through clenched teeth he said, "You're making a mistake." I met his gaze, steady. "No," I said, "I'm making a record." I reached for my jacket. "We're meeting with a lawyer," I continued. "Soon, everyone present." His face changed, not anger now, concern, because he knew what came next wasn't something he could manage with pressure or volume. And as I opened the door and felt the afternoon air hit my face, one truth settled in hard and clear. This argument wasn't about my health. It was about control, and I had just taken it back. Elaine Porter didn't flinch when she read the papers. That's what told me everything before she even spoke. She was an elder law attorney in her RLY 60s, sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses, posture straight like someone who'd spent decades watching families come apart over paperwork just like this. Elliot sat across from her, arms crossed, jaw tight. Marissa sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the edge of the table. Red sat next to me, silent, watchful. Elaine turned the pages slowly, too slowly for Elliot's liking. "These were presented to you as medical forms?" she asked without looking up. "Yes," I said, "that's exactly how they were framed." She nodded once and kept reading. "This document grants durable power of attorney," she said. "Immediate, not conditional, not limited." Elliot shifted in his chair. "That's standard," he said. "Hospitals require." Elaine held up a finger. "Please don't interrupt me," she said calmly. The room went still. She turned another page. "This section authorizes control over financial accounts, property decisions, asset transfers." I felt my stomach drop, even though Red had already warned me. "This isn't healthcare advocacy," she continued. "This is comprehensive authority." Marissa finally looked up. "But it's for emergencies," she said quietly. Elaine met her eyes. "No, it activates the moment it's signed." Elliot leaned forward. "You're making this sound sinister." Elaine finally looked at him. "I'm making it sound accurate," she replied. She placed the papers flat on the table and folded her hands. If Mr. Callahan had signed this, his son would have had full legal authority to make medical and financial decisions immediately, including selling property, moving funds, and determining living arrangements. I thought about the nursing home brochures Elliot had shown me, the way he'd said Monday like it was already decided. "That's elder financial abuse," Elaine said plainly, "or at the very least an attempt." Elliot's face flushed. "That's ridiculous." Elaine didn't raise her voice. "Intent is determined by pattern, not excuses." Red let out a slow breath. Elaine continued. "What concerns me most is how this was presented. Misrepresentation to obtain authority is a serious issue." Marissa's hands trembled slightly now. "I didn't know," she said. Elaine nodded. "That's often the case." Elliot stood abruptly. "So what, you're threatening us now?" Elaine remained seated. "I'm informing you." She turned to me. "Frank, you did not sign these. That's critical. You still retain full control." I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in days. "But," she added, "if this had gone through, reversing it would have been expensive, public, and painful." Elliot stared at the table. For the first time since this started, he looked unsure. Elaine closed the folder. "You did the right thing by stopping." I nodded slowly. "My wife always said." Elaine looked up. "Janice." I froze. "You knew her." "She consulted me once," Elaine said, "years ago. She was very clear." Elliot looked up sharply. "About what?" Elaine met my eyes, not his. "She left instructions," Elaine said, "and they weren't subtle." The room went quiet. Elliot swallowed. "What instructions?" I leaned back in my chair, heart steady now, voice calm. "The kind," I said, "that explains why this didn't work." And in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't just about stopping my son. It was about finally understanding how well my wife had prepared for this exact moment. The room went quiet in a way I'd only heard once before, a long time ago overseas, right after bad news landed and nobody knew who should speak first. We were sitting in Elaine Porter's office. my son Elliot on one side of the table, Marissa beside him, hands folded, eyes fixed on a spot just above the carpet. Red sat next to me, back straight, jaw tight. Elaine sat at the head, calm as stone. Elliot cleared his throat. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said. "I was just trying to help my father manage things. He's 71, stuff happens." Elaine didn't argue, she didn't raise her voice, she simply opened the folder in front of her. "Let's go line by line," she said. The first page came out, then the second, then the third. She read sections aloud, slowly, clearly, no emotion. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. "This clause transfers full medical decision-making authority," she said. "This one restricts access to personal accounts. This one allows liquidation of property if deemed medically necessary." Elliot shifted in his chair. "That's not what it means in practice." Elaine looked up at him for the first time. "That is exactly what it means in practice." The room stayed silent. Marissa finally glanced at Elliot, just for a second. Whatever passed between them didn't help him. "I never planned to use it like that," Elliot said. "It was just precaution." Elaine nodded once. "Intent doesn't change effect." She turned to me. "Frank, had you signed this, control would have shifted immediately. No court order, no review, just activation." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Red exhaled sharply through his nose. "That's what I told you." Elaine closed the folder. "What your son attempted falls under elder financial abuse, even if framed as medical concern." Elliot's face drained of color. "You're saying I'm a criminal now?" "I'm saying," Elaine replied evenly, "that you're very close to becoming one." No one spoke after that. I broke the silence. "There's something else you should all know," I said. Elliot looked at me, confused, nervous now. "Janice left instructions," I continued. "Written, dated, specific." Elaine raised her eyebrows slightly. Red looked at me, surprised. "She told me that if anyone ever tried to take control of my life under the excuse of care," I said, "I was to do exactly what I'm doing right now." Elliot swallowed. "Dad, I'm not finished," I said calmly. "I loved you enough to trust you," I went on. "But your mother loved me enough to protect me." The silence that followed wasn't tense anymore, it was final. Elliot stared at the table like the answers might appear if he waited long enough. They didn't. And in that quiet, I realized something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was exposure. I didn't tell Elliot what I planned to bring to that meeting. I let him believe it was just another conversation. Another chance for him to talk louder than me and wear me down the way he always tried to. He arrived confident, suit pressed, jaw tight, already rehearsing his version of concern. I arrived with a single folder under my arm. The conference room was smaller than I expected. Neutral walls, a long table, too much light. Elaine sat at the head, calm as stone. Marissa took a seat beside Elliot, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the grain of the table like it might offer answers she didn't want to give. Elliot started talking before anyone asked him to. "I never meant to scare anyone," he said. "Dad's health isn't what it used to be. I was just trying to make things easier." Elaine didn't respond. She waited. "Silence is dangerous when you're lying." Elliot kept going. "If something happens to him, decisions need to be made quickly. Hospitals don't wait, neither do bills." I finally spoke. "That's not what the paper said." He glanced at me, annoyed. "Dad, we've been over this." "No," I said quietly, "we haven't." I slid the folder across the table toward Elaine. Inside was something Elliot hadn't seen before, not because it was hidden, but because he'd never bothered to look. Elaine opened it and adjusted her glasses. "This," she said, tapping the page, "is a notarized amendment executed 12 years ago." Elliot leaned forward. "What amendment?" Elaine didn't look at him yet. She read, "Any power of attorney document naming a direct descendant becomes void if executed without independent legal counsel present for the grantor." The room changed. Marissa looked up. Elliot frowned. "That doesn't," Elaine raised a finger. "There's more." She turned the page. "In such cases, full authority reverts immediately to the grantor, and any attempt to enforce the document may be considered coercive." Elliot's confidence cracked. "That paper you brought your father," Elaine said, finally meeting his eyes, "was invalid the moment you placed it in front of him. I watched my son realize something awful in real time. He hadn't been clever, he'd been careless." "I didn't know about this," Elliot said quickly. "That's because you never asked," I replied. "You assumed." Elaine closed the folder. "Your mother insisted on this clause," she said gently to me. "She was very specific." Janice. Even now she was standing between me and betrayal. Elliot pushed back his chair. "So what now?" he asked, voice tight. Elaine folded her hands. "Now your father decides how this proceeds." Everyone looked at me. For 71 years, decisions had been made around me, over me, sometimes in spite of me. This time the weight settled where it belonged. "I decide," I said slowly, "that nothing about my life gets signed without me understanding every word." Elliot opened his mouth, then closed it. For once there was nothing left to argue. As the meeting ended, Elaine gathered her papers. Marissa stood quietly. Elliot lingered, eyes darting, searching for a way back into control. I picked up my folder and turned toward the door. Behind me, Elliot said my name. Dad, we need to talk about what happens next. I paused, hand on the handle. Yes, I said without turning around. We do, but not on his terms, and not with papers slid across a table ever again. I didn't sleep the night after the lawyer meeting, not because I was afraid, but because something old and restless had woken up inside me. The kind of awareness you get when you realize the danger wasn't outside the house. It had been sitting across from you at the dinner table, calling you Dad. I sat at my kitchen top. Just after sunrise, the same place Elliot had slid those papers toward me like they were nothing. The wood still had the faint scratch from where Red's ring had dragged across it when he stopped my hand from signing. That moment kept replaying in my head. If Red hadn't shown up unannounced that day, if he hadn't trusted his instincts over politeness, I would have signed my life away with my own pen. I poured myself coffee and stared at the steam rising. 71 years old, retired Army, survived things that would have broken younger men. And yet I almost lost everything because I wanted to believe my son wouldn't cross that line. Elaine's words echoed in my mind. Frank, what he attempted qualifies as elder financial exploitation. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was a plan. My phone buzzed mid-morning. Elliot, I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another call, then a text. We need to talk. You embarrassed me yesterday. I read it twice, not I'm sorry, not I went too far, embarrassed. That told me everything. I thought about Janice, my wife, how she used to say that people reveal their priorities when control slips out of their hands. I used to think she was being cynical, she was being prepared. I picked up the phone and called Elaine instead. I want to proceed, I told her. She didn't ask with what, she already knew. By noon, the paperwork was in motion, reassignments, safeguards activated. Notifications sent. Everything Elliot thought he was quietly taking control of was now locked behind walls he couldn't climb. That afternoon, Red came by again, sat across from me like he always had, solid, quiet, loyal. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I will be. He smiled faintly. Takes guts to admit your own kid tried to run you. I didn't admit it, I said. I confronted it. That evening, Elliot showed up without calling. He stood on my porch, jaw tight, eyes sharp, not worried. Not ashamed, angry. You blindsided me, he said the moment I opened the door. You went behind my back. I looked at him for a long second. No, I said calmly. I went around your trap. His face hardened. You're overreacting. That's what people say, I replied, when they get caught. He scoffed. So what now, you cutting me off, making me the villain? I shook my head slowly. No, son, I'm making myself visible again. He didn't understand that, not yet, but I did. For the first time in years, my name meant authority again. Not age, not weakness, not inconvenience, just ownership. As I closed the door that night, I realized something that settled deep and solid in my chest. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was reclaiming myself. And Elliot had no idea what was coming next. The house felt different once everyone left. Not emptier, quieter, like it could finally breathe again. I sat alone at the same kitchen table where Elliot had slid those papers toward me days earlier. The documents were gone now, locked away in Elaine's briefcase, but the memory of them lingered. Thin pages, heavy intentions. At 71, you don't expect to learn new kinds of betrayal. You think you've seen them all, on battlefields, in boardrooms, in marriages that don't survive the truth. But there's something uniquely hollow about realizing your own child tried to erase you with a signature. Red sat across from me, nursing a cup of coffee he'd reheated twice. He didn't say much. Army men understand silence. We'd both spent years learning when words only get in the way. You did good, he finally said. I almost didn't, I replied. That truth sat heavy. Elaine had been clear. What Elliot attempted wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. Elder financial abuse dressed up as concern. The law had a name for it. Consequences, too. I thought about Janice. About how she'd looked at me that night years ago when she said, "Promise me you won't confuse love with access." I'd laughed then, kissed her forehead, changed the subject. She'd been right. Again, that evening I walked through the house slowly, touched the back of the old recliner, straightened a framed photo from my Army days. This place wasn't just walls and furniture, it was proof I still existed on my own terms. My phone buzzed once. A message from Elliot. We need to talk. No apology, no explanation. Just need. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I was finished reacting. Aging teaches you this. Urgency is often a weapon. People rush you when they want something before you're ready to say no. I poured myself a drink, just one, and stepped onto the back porch. The sun was lowering, soft and unremarkable. Ordinary days become precious when you realize how close you came to losing them. I wasn't cutting Elliot out of my life, but I wasn't handing him the steering wheel either. Tomorrow I'd make changes, update documents, move accounts, put barriers where trust used to be assumed, not out of spite but clarity, Respect doesn't survive on hope, it survives on structure. As night settled in, I felt something unexpected beneath the weight of it all. Relief. Because for the first time since Janice passed, I knew this for certain. No one was taking my life from me quietly. Not with a pen, not with paperwork, not ever again. And whatever came next, whatever storms Elliot tried to raise, I would meet them standing, not signing. Elliot didn't speak for 3 days after the meeting. No calls, no texts, no fake check-ins masked as concern. The silence felt intentional, like he was waiting for me to blink first. For years, that tactic worked. Silence used to make me uneasy, it made me chase peace. This time, it just made things clearer. I sat alone in my living room, the same place where he'd slid those papers across the table, confident I'd sign without reading. The house felt different now, not lonely, settled, like it had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Elaine had warned me this moment would come. When control fails, she said, distance becomes punishment. She was right. On the fourth night my phone buzzed, midnight again. Same pattern as always, wait until the world is quiet, then try to rewrite the story. Elliot, Dad, this didn't have to get ugly. I read it once, didn't respond. Another message followed. You embarrassed me. You let outsiders turn this into something it was. Outsiders, Red, Elaine, the law, anyone who didn't bend with him. Then came the familiar turn. I was trying to protect you. You're not as sharp as you used to be. You know that. That line finally did it. Not anger, not sadness. Resolve. I stared at the photo on the shelf, Janice in her garden, hands in dirt, smiling like she knew something I didn't yet. She'd seen this version of Elliot coming long before I had. She didn't panic. She prepared. And now it was my turn. I opened a new message. I didn't type quickly. Every word mattered. I told him I wasn't angry. That I didn't hate him, that I understood fear can make people do shameful things. Then I told him something he hadn't expected. I told him trust doesn't survive coercion. I told him love doesn't require signatures. And I told him any relationship that needs pressure to exist isn't one I'm willing to maintain. I explained the boundaries clearly. No financial authority, no medical authority, no legal role in my life going forward. Visits would be by invitation only. Conversations would be respectful or they wouldn't happen at all. I ended with the truth he'd been avoiding. You didn't lose anything, I typed. You gave it up the moment you tried to take what wasn't yours. I read the message twice, then I sent it. The response came almost immediately. 3 dots, then nothing. They disappeared. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to happen. I felt like something had finished. Outside, the streetlights clicked on one by one. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. The kind that keeps going when power games stop working. Janice used to say character isn't revealed when things go wrong, it's revealed when control is threatened. Now I knew exactly who my son was, and more importantly, I knew who I was willing to be for the rest of my life. The last move wasn't his, it was mine. I didn't feel victorious when it was over. That surprised me. I thought there would be relief or satisfaction or at least a sense of justice that tasted sweet on the tongue. Instead, what settled in my chest was something quieter, heavier, acceptance. Elaine folded the last document and slid it across the table. You're protected, she said. Your assets are secure, and moving forward, no one can make medical or financial decisions without your written consent. Elliot didn't look at me. He stared at the floor like it might open up and swallow him whole. Marissa finally spoke then, her voice small. We didn't think it would go this far. That, I said calmly, is the problem. You didn't think. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue about. I went home alone that afternoon. Same house, same chair by the window, but it felt different now. Lighter, like something toxic had finally been named and removed. That night I pulled out Janice's old footlocker from the closet. Inside were letters, notes, and one envelope marked in her handwriting, for Frank. When he needs to remember who he is. I didn't cry when I read it, I smiled. She reminded me that strength wasn't loud, that dignity wasn't about winning, that love didn't mean surrendering your future to someone else's ambition. Most of all, she reminded me that trust is a gift, not a debt. Elliot didn't call for weeks. When he finally did, his voice was different, quieter, careful. He apologized, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly enough that I believed he understood something had changed forever. I didn't promise forgiveness. I promised boundaries. Aging teaches you that some lessons only come when you're willing to disappoint people who benefited from your silence. It teaches why. Oh, that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of truth. I didn't lose my son, but I did lose the illusion that blood alone guarantees loyalty, and I gained something better. My voice, my agency, my future. If you're watching this and someone is rushing you to sign something you don't understand, pause. If someone tells you it's just paperwork, read it. And if your gut tightens, listen. Because the most dangerous betrayals don't come with raised voices, they come with smiles. And if this story reminded you that dignity, clarity, and self-respect matter, especially later in life, then subscribe. Some lessons come late, Others come just in time.